Okay, we are now formally recording again. For those of you who joined late, I'll do this again. My name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the policy director with Progressive Massachusetts, and we are delighted to have the latest in our virtual Massachusetts Fights Back forum kind of series, talking about democracy, especially as we're now every November is voting month because of Election Day, and we were thinking about what issues that we would want to focus on this month. That came front of mind, knowing that we kicked off the month with an election day for those of you in cities in Massachusetts. And we're again 1 month out to a critical election, or sorry, 1 year out from a critical election of the midterms coming away that will be here way faster than you think. Want to bring up now David Weinberg from Protect Democracy to talk about some of that work of protecting our democratic institutions as we head in to the upcoming elections. And David, if you need slides, just either request that or I can make you a co-host.
No need.
Okay.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody, for being here on a weekday evening. My name is David Weinberg. I am speaking to you from Maryland, although I'm a former Massachusetts resident, married to a Massachusetts native. Since a lot of you answered in the chat why democracy is important to you, I'll say democracy is important to me because I would like to live in a society where everybody's voice is equally taken into account and reflected in outcomes, which is not to say that our democracy does that successfully today, but that's my hope. Um, so I work for Protect Democracy, a national cross-ideological nonprofit that's dedicated to defeating the authoritarian challenge that we face in this era. We use litigation, advocacy, research, and technology to try and stop the inappropriate consolidation of power, defend dissent, help protect our elections, and build a thriving multiracial, multi-party democracy. Uh, I would like to actually start by touching on the North Carolina Supreme Court litigation that we heard about a little earlier because I think it's a really, really important episode. It's not something I was planning on touching on, but there's the litigation that groups like Brennan and others engaged in was really, really important. And the victory in that case helped deter a potential outcome where it would serve as a demonstration to other candidates in other races to try and similarly throw out ballots after the fact on large scale in ways that could be even more harmful downstream if it had sort of been a successful model. Thankfully, it was not for that sort of subversion attempt. But I think there's also a little asterisk on it that's a wonderful story about the impact of people power, which is that the end of that episode was not a Supreme Court judgment, either in state court or in federal court. It was, I believe, an appellate judgment, if I'm recalling correctly. And the dissatisfied challenger who was trying to throw out ballots and keep the proper winner from being seated on the state Supreme Court chose not to pursue it all the way up to the US Supreme Court. And my understanding is that the reason they likely chose not to do so was because in the court of public opinion, they were getting such severe pushback from broad quarters of society that what he was doing was inappropriate, such that it felt like an unappealing thing to keep trying to appeal up to Supreme Court because it was so just manifestly undemocratic. And so I think that's an instance in which people speaking out, people organizing, people demonstrating had a really important impact on the outcome, even in an area such as litigation, where we often may think of as something that only sort of elite attorneys are able to engage in necessarily. So with that little detour, I'll shift back to what I was planning on talking about. So the there are a lot of different threats to our democracy. There are a lot of different threats to our elections. There are also a lot of different possible remedies, solutions. I expect that Marisol and Shanique may touch on the importance of reforms to how people in the Bay State vote. um, and including the importance of same-day voter registration. I hope we'll hear from that in a little bit. So I won't touch on that much either. One measure that I will talk about is a bill that I've been advocating for in the Massachusetts legislature, which is to protect against something called faithless presidential electors. To rewind a bit to our high school civics, and something we've had to review a lot over the last decade, obviously, with all these efforts to try and undo or upset or overturn elections improperly, even after voters have cast their ballots. Um, when we cast our ballots for president, um, there's an intermediary process whereby we're choosing presidential electors, typically nominated in most states by political parties, and that those individuals then cast electoral vote ballots about a month after the election day, and that on the basis of those, our states then send in their electoral votes, and that's then subsequently counted by Congress in January, and on that basis, a president is inaugurated. Um, Massachusetts has been a leader in joining the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, something that if some more states join it, it will be a potentially very effective way of addressing the fundamental inequalities of the Electoral College. Um, but in the era in which we live, or at least in the current period, in current moment, before that compact is in national effect, um, the way in which electors vote is especially important. Um, in some past elections, there have been at most a very small handful of presidential electors who have voted not in the way that their state voters have chosen. So at odds with the certified election outcome of their states. However, we at Protect Democracy and others are deeply concerned that this relative volume of faithless presidential electors may be set to skyrocket if protections are not in place across a large number of states. Um, One need only look around our country right now over the last year to see the outrageous, inappropriate, and illegal shakedowns of law-abiding individuals and institutions across our society by abuses of the federal government. Um, to know that it's not a huge stretch of the imagination that to envision that the next time there's a sore loser in a presidential election in our country, they might try and inappropriately coerce presidential electors across dozens of states. Now, in 2020, there was another subversion effort focused on abusing the presidential elector process. That was a somewhat different process, or somewhat different sort of anti-democracy subversion scheme. That was what I refer to as fake presidential electors. So rather than faithful, fake. This was something that I worked on a lot when I served as a staffer for the January 6th Select Committee in Congress, where we looked into this and reported on it and held hearings on it. Thankfully, Congress passed legislation subsequently that addressed this aspect of the problem from 2020. I wish Congress had passed more ambitious legislation that would have done more to address the full spectrum of threats to our democracy that were on display in the post-election period in 2020. But it is what it is. The legislation that Congress did pass, the Electoral Count Reform Act, pretty much closed the door quite well on the possibility of fake elector plots in the future, meaning the losing side in a state claiming that their elector nominees are the true electors of the state and sending in basically fake electoral votes into Congress and trying to get Congress to count those or throw them all out or something improper such as that. So given that that sort of attempted scheme is unlikely to be attempted in the future, we fear that in the 6-week period between election day and elector balloting day in a future election, if there's a sort of presidential loser, um, that that valid presidential electors in states that they lost may be at risk. The legislation that we support, I'm grateful to say Progressive Mass has endorsed. Thank you very much, Progressive Mass, for that. I'm also grateful to say, Justin, this is probably outside your department, but Brennan has endorsed as well. So thank you, Brennan, for that too. Um, and Shanique, thank you for your advice on the legislative process and dynamics on this issue. What the legislation would do is basically follow the lead of 24 other states, as well as the District of Columbia, whereby it would specify that if a presidential elector tries to cast an electoral vote ballot that doesn't reflect the will of Massachusetts' voters, that elector is removed from their position, they forfeit it, and someone else subject to similar obligations is appointed to fill that spot. I've talked for about 10 minutes. I can talk about other aspects of things that people can do to address election subversion threats, or I can stop there and wait.
Maybe take 2 minutes to talk about other kind of
Sure. Yeah,
pushing back
absolutely.
into election subversion threats, and then if people have questions, we'll bring them up at the end.
Absolutely. Now, one of the ways in which threats to representative elections has been playing out this past year, obviously, has been this mid-decade redistricting effort underway in Texas and other places. Um, One of the reasons it has not been more impactful so far, or sort of even worse than we're seeing, is that legislators in some states, such as Indiana, such as Kansas, have been unable to pass sort of these or not retro, technically not, but these mid-decade sort of improperly timed redistricting efforts to try and game who their voters are. And the reason is because people power. People have been pushing back and weighing in with their legislators in really impactful ways. Additionally, the midterms coming up next year are going to be a really important moment for our democracy. There are going to be all kinds of ways in which they are potentially facing significant challenges and risks. One way in which people are doing something important right now is by speaking out, is by litigating for litigators, but is by organizing against the inappropriate actions by ICE, by CBP, by the federal government putting National Guard in places where it shouldn't be used, and so forth, to make clear that military or other law enforcement from the federalized side, is not normal to be used in this way and shouldn't be used in this way, and to try and make clear that society does not support this sort of use, especially as we go into a major election year. Um, Especially, and then lastly, the improper conduct of the House Speaker in Washington, D.C. over the last month with regard to refusing for quite some time until recently to swear in the newly elected member-elect from Arizona, Adelita Grijalva, um, is hopefully not a harbinger of improper schemes to come in January 2027 after a new Congress is elected. The parliamentary dynamics of how that would play out within a new House are opaque and arcane. But the punchline of it is that anything that Mike Johnson might try and pull off there really depends on a vote of the full House or a near full House in order to consolidate. And so, to the extent to which even sort of um, even Republican members in very purple districts are hearing from constituents, are hearing from societal, different sectors of society and organized groups of the people, making clear that this is inappropriate. The better chance there is that the Congress that's sworn in 2027 will reflect the genuine outcome of the election in 2026.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I got a round of Zoom applause for David, and then I'll bring up our next speaker, Shanique. would you be ready to go on? I'm adding, can
I'm
you
I'm
spotlight,
I'm
Shanique?
letting David get his flowers. I'm
Okay.
waiting for the round of applause.
Ah,
Okay.
very sweet of you, Shanique.
Uh, Next up we have Shanique Rodriguez from the Massachusetts Voter Table. And Shanique, tell us a little bit about more about what can we do here in Massachusetts in pushing our legislature to strengthen voting rights and democracy in our state.
All right. Again, folks, Shanique Rodriguez. I'm the executive director of the Massachusetts Voter Table. For those of you who are not familiar with the table, we are a nonprofit C3 civic engagement table made up of 40 plus grassroots partners across the state. Our work is to advocate for voting rights and also increase civic engagement or voter participation in low income and BIPOC communities, which in our state looks mostly like the 26 gateway cities. Um, Part of our work to move voting rights legislation or voter access legislation has been through the Election Modernization Coalition, which is a coalition that's made up of some key voting rights orgs across the state, like Common Cause Massachusetts, ACLU Massachusetts, League of Women Voters, MassVOTE, MassPerg, Lawyers for Civil Rights, Disability Law Center, the Jewish Community Relations Center of Greater Boston, and the Urban League. To learn more about our coalition, the pieces of legislation that I'll jump into talking about, I'm dropping in the chat for you all the link to our coalition website. Um, but this year we have some key priority legislation that will make a significant difference in democracy in Massachusetts that addresses some key issues that we've seen over the last few decades in Massachusetts, as well as key things that we saw get removed from the Votes Act, which was passed about 4 years ago. I don't know. Time, what is she? I don't know. So that had to have been, Heather understands me. That could have been 2 years, 5 years, 10 years at this point in my life. I'm not sure. And this year feels like we've lived 7 decades. So let's be honest. But some of the key legislations that we're focused on, and we at the voter table alongside the election modernization coalitions are prioritizing, is same-day voter registration, decoupling or separating the municipal census from the inactive voter registration list, and then disability voting access oversight. Um, I'll start with same day voter registration. I know this is an issue many of you really care about, have been advocating on as members of Progressive Mass, and Progressive Mass have certainly taken a stand and supported this piece of legislation. But currently, same day voter registration allows voters who show up on election day ready to vote who happen to not be registered or need to register again should they be marked inactive, right? And the key thing to note about same day voter registration that it means any day that you can vote. So that includes early voting as well. So it includes the day of election as well as the early voting period that folks could in person both register to vote and vote on the same day. Very simple, very easy. 22 other states, including DC, has same day voter registration. This is the key legislation that sort of formed the Election Modernization Coalition. So many of my predecessors have been a part of the formation of the Election Modernization Coalition, but this has been one of the key angst of democracy policy in Massachusetts legislature for one reason or another. Um, it was a part of the Votes Act, and there was some debacle on the floor and lots of contentious issues with leadership around same day voter registration. We have feelings, I have thoughts, but we will save that for other times or some of your questions bring it out. Um, and it took them until June to hammer out the agreement between the House and the Senate version, correct? Um, Jonathan. And one thing to note is that same day has been a key part of the legislation and a reason why we formed as a coalition for well over a decade. So it's been well over a decade that we've been trying to pass same day voter registration in Massachusetts, which is disappointing considering that Massachusetts likes to tote its progressiveness and its forefront on progressive issues, where we just simply cannot get it together over same day. So many folks in the coalition who's been here from the iteration of fighting on that, including Jeff at Common Cause, who literally started his job working on same-day voter registration, including the ED of MassVOTE, Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, as well, started her work as at MassVOTE on same-day voter registration. So it's been a long time coming. Separating the municipal census and voter registration. So this, a little education for you all. You might have seen your local municipal census come to you every year, sometime in the summer. It's the one where you have to write down whether you have a dog, you have to get a dog license, and how many people are in your residency. It's like a short little piece of paper. Well, Massachusetts is one of few, if not the only state that does this sort of punitive measure of if you do not fill that out, you will be then placed on the inactive voter list. So if for whatever reason you receive that, don't fill it out and don't get it back to your town or city clerk's office, you will be placed on the inactive list. So what often happens is you're not aware that that happened to you, and you show up on election day and they say to you, you are inactive. Now, in that scenario, you have to file a provisional ballot. But in order to do that, this is where a form of identification that marks like your address and your name. So it could be a piece of mail, it could be your actual ID. You'd have to show them that in order to get the provisional ballot, in order to cast a provisional ballot, and then your ballot will be counted afterwards. Now, what we found in our research at the Election Modernization Coalition is that oftentimes a large percentage of provisional ballots in our state get thrown out and not counted over technical or administrative reasons for one reason or another. So it is the least likely way that we want voters to be voting is through a provisional ballot, right? Because there's this off chance that it might not get counted. And there's nothing worse than thinking your vote is going to count and it doesn't count, right? And so what this legislation is proposing is that we decouple those things. We say, yes, keep your municipal census for the purpose of jury duty. They use those documentations to figure out jury duty and all of those other things that they use it for, and the reason why the city needs that information. But it should not be tied to you being an eligible voter. That those things should not be connected to each other. And it sort of quasi-imposes like an informal poll tax, that if you don't do this thing, you simply cannot vote as a regular voter on election day. And then, however, where I will say that this becomes moot is if we pass same-day voter registration. Because if you are placed on the active list, right, and you find out before election day, and it's still within the voter registration deadline, you can re-register to vote and then become active again. But because we don't have same day, there's this sort of 10-day cutoff. And so if you find that out somewhere either on election day or within that window of which you cannot register to vote in Massachusetts, you are going to have to file a provisional ballot. But if you find out before, or if we have same day, right? Then if you find out, you can just simply re-register to vote at the point that you're about to cast a ballot and be able to cast a ballot either way. So if we were to get same day and let's say not get the decoupling bill, we would be covered. It means that people who find out they're inactive on election day will be able to just simply re-register and vote on the same day. And then disability voting access oversight. This is really brought into the coalition through Disability Law Center. If those of you who may not be familiar with them, on election days, and certainly they participate in election protection, but they often sort of do surveying or audits of the polls, right? To make sure that they're accessible for people with disabilities. And what they found over time that there were a number of voting and polling locations, including early voting locations, that were not accessible for people with disability. A lot, not just even getting in the building, but for some of them were that necessary things that needed to be in the actual voting location were not. The automark machines were not working correctly, right? That the machines that were supposed to help people who might be deaf or blind were not working correctly. And so this is why we have pushed forth this piece of legislation with an sort of encouraging the Secretary of the Commonwealth to arrange periodic inspections of polling locations to make sure that they're ADA compliant, that the machines are working, and that folks with disabilities also have access on election day and are not deterred or pushed away from voting simply because their wheelchair can't fit in there or the automark machines are not working. We had our hearing in September, and a person with disabilities spoke about how the automark machines during the primaries were not working correctly at his polling location. It took him 3 tries. The machine kept crashing. He was there for nearly an hour trying to vote on the automark machine. That is absolutely egregious. And so we are proposing that with the passage of this bill, that there is periodic polling location checks of these things to make sure that people with disabilities are able to vote on election days. So why are these pieces of legislation important to Massachusetts voters and for democracy? Well, we know that with same day, we are increasing voter turnout. Despite the Secretary of State in multiple statewide elections saying we had tremendous turnout. That might be true for upper class, white affluential communities where we are in fact seeing 70 to 80% turnout on statewide elections. For our gateway cities where most of us live, even on a statewide or presidential election, we don't go past 30% turnout. And when you go down to the municipal level, that turnout is even lower. We are seeing in some places 11, 12, 13% turnout. And so this is a good way to increase turnout and also increase access to the ballot box, right? Disability oversight goes without question, right? It goes without question why this is important. There are people who are eligible to vote, ready to vote, and simply do not have access for clear things that are in the laws that should be available for them to do so. My mother is one of those folks who have difficulty with her eyesight. I was just texting Jonathan, like, oh my God, I've just got back to Western Mass after bringing her to Mass General for seeing a specialist for her eyes, right? And every election day since she's had this disability with her vision, I have had to go in and read the ballot for her and help her fill it out. But not everyone has someone who can be there with them. Sometimes folks go there on their own and expect that the things that are supposed to be there for them are there to work. And they're not working. And then you have folks in the polling location who don't know how to use the machines, have to wait on the clerk or the town clerk to come over there, or to get the machine swapped out. We saw some of that on the presidential election day where machines had to be swapped out or brought in because of difficulties. So again, speaking to access in Massachusetts, this is Massachusetts. Folks with disabilities should not be facing these barriers to voting. And it is a much larger number than we anticipate. And then decoupling the municipal census. Again, why are we doing this? No one is doing this. Why are we doing it? And it doesn't feel right to punish people for not receiving a mailer. Marisol, who you'll hear about from Election Protection, who is part of MassVOTE, who's a part of this coalition, shared that even she was on the inactive list. So even some of us who are very active voters, who are super voters, right, will encounter these same problems. Our field director at the voter table moved to Cambridge from Somerville, or I could be saying that wrong. It could be the other way around. But either way, he moved, and 6 months after his move, he gets a letter in the mail saying that he was placed on the inactive list. And he was like, I just moved. How could I have filled out a municipal census to this new address? Right. And I just remember that becoming a no. So even the folks working on this issue are being placed on the inactive list for one issue or another. And it could simply be that I have moved, right? And you sent my municipal census to my old address, or you sent it to this household before I even got here. And now that I'm registered here, it's somehow me that hasn't filled it out. Or for some folks, I don't even recall ever getting it. Or for some folks, the envelope isn't marked because they're supposed to be marking the outside of the envelope, letting you know what's in it. And for some folks, we've heard that we have not seen that on our envelope. So they might have think that it's junk mail and just thrown it out. It also is supposed to be filled out with one person in the household. So it could be addressed to one voter and not both voters. And that person doesn't fill it out. So you very well could have been in a household where someone was supposed to fill it out and they either didn't have your name or didn't fill it out. And now all of you are inactive, right? So those are sort of barriers, and these are simple easy fixes, and not things that are going to cost thousands of dollars to do. But somehow, some way, these have become the most controversial issues within the State House. There has been angst in the building, and we're constantly coming up against, will this actually, be monumental to voters? I feel that if a voter shows up to vote, they should be able to vote. If I am eligible to vote, I have arrived on election day to vote. There is no reason in the great United States of America and in Massachusetts should we be telling people, give me some paperwork to prove that you are who you are, even though we know that you must have been a registered voter, because how could I be inactive from the voter registration list had I not registered to vote before? People should be able to vote. The same for folks with disabilities. They have arrived to vote. Let's allow folks to vote. And we should not be pushing these things for 10, 20 years of trying to get something passed. It is deplorable. And what can you do about it? I've dropped the link to the coalition page in there. There is a toolkit in there and a click to email your lawmakers. Right now, all of these pieces of legislation is in the Joint Committee of Election Laws. As you may have heard, there are new rules in the building. So by December 3rd, which is about 2 weeks from now, a little less than 2 weeks from now, everything needs to be reported out of committee. So what you can do tomorrow morning, when you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, is just click to email my lawmaker, or if you know your lawmakers personally, because I know some of you do. I know how y'all roll up in here at Progressive Mass. Y'all are action takers, so I don't need to tell you how to contact your legislators, but should you need it, there's a nice little tool that'll take you there. Put in your zip code, you do your thing, and there's some sample email there, and write an email on all or one of these pieces of legislation encouraging your legislator to move this out of joint committee, or talk to leadership, or talk to the folks on the Joint Committee of Election Laws to make sure that they move these bills out favorably for a vote next session. And then if you are folks who have organizations that are nonprofits that could endorse these pieces of legislation, there is an endorsement form as well. So feel free to share that with your supervisors or your organizations to sign on as being supportive of these pieces of legislation. So right now, I think for all of the pieces of legislation that you're hearing today from your speakers, everything is sort of waiting on this December 3rd deadline. And so now is the time to be calling lawmakers. Now is the time to be emailing them and letting them know what matters to you, especially when it comes to democracy at a time where people are just losing faith in democracy. Let's have Massachusetts be different. Let's have faith in our own democracy here in Massachusetts. We might not be able to fight against everything that's happening nationally, but let's take care of home, shall we? Thank you.
Awesome. Can we get a round of Zoom applause for Shanique? Thank you so much. Uh, and then I'm going to bring up Marisol Santiago from MassVOTE to talk about election protection. So bringing us down a level from kind of from the state house to what's happening on the ground to make sure that people are able to exercise their right to vote across all communities in Massachusetts. And we'll have any questions that people want to ask our speakers at the end. So take it away, Marisol.
Hey, hey. Okay. So thank you again, Jonathan, for the invitation to Progressive Mass and to the panelists here. It's been great hearing from all of you, deeply resonating. I love the question about why is democracy important to you? And I want to just share, and that's sort of how I want to uplift us, because I know that we're on Zoom and the energies is sort of like stretching and moving when we start to get fired up about the work. So hang in there with me. And then I'm looking forward to the questions for all the panelists and what we can continue to learn from each other. So right now, I do want to say gratitude to Shanique, right, for sharing about some of our priority legislation. And that sort of goes into a little bit about what I'm going to talk about, which is election protections, and the importance of what this kind of work is and why it's necessary. I will say that, for some of us that have been following what the legislature has done for many, many decades, decoupling municipal census started, I think, around in the curve of 1993 by Governor Bill Weld. And to Shanique's point, and as a resident of Chelsea, Mass, which is where I currently reside, we have seen time and time again many people being turned away. But so the organizers in the room, right? We know how hard when we hear those numbers about turnout and participation, and then you finally get folks to go to the polls. What is their experience like, right? What is their experience when they walk into these booths, into these rooms? So for multilingual, multicultural communities, language justice, disability access, all these things are important. But as you heard from Justin, right? Department of Justice, we're looking at some different times, right? And it's the reason why we're all in this room. This is the reason why democracy is important to me, because there were people before me that cared about making this world better, right? And there were reasons that people organized and co-created this future that I have been privileged to live in, right? Rights, women being able to access a ballot. Talk about the same-day voter registration. When a woman gets married and needs to change her last name, and they ask us for an ID. Well, better pray that our last name matches the one on our voter reg rolls. So, thinking about all these things are so multi-layered. I know I'm preaching to the choir in this room, but yeah, we have to continue to advocate for these things that, as I tell my young adult children, these were things that that became the norm for us. Voting is a norm. Reproductive rights for a lot of households that believe in reproductive rights for our young ladies. They think that's the norm. Accessing birth control, learning about it in their schools, or being able to have access to Commonwealth care. Some of us in the room here remember when the State Health Connector Board was created and Commonwealth care became a thing. Massachusetts leads, right? So this is the same sort of moment. And I'm not going to minimize how much work and how much we all care about what we're seeing and the things that are being taken away. Democracy is the fundamental fabric of what creates a beautiful society, right? It's like our budget. It's a statement of values. And so we have to be in that relationship with creating the future that we want for our children, for, like that saying says, plant the tree that you might not even benefit by sitting in its shade, right? So like democracy is bigger than us. Democracy is like really thinking about the planet. I saw some folks in the chat. So I've been in this work now for well over 2 decades in Massachusetts. And I have been that young Latina that got mentored, right? And knew the importance of turning out her friends and family and community to go out and vote, and talking about the importance of voting, from issues, from ballot campaigns. And in the good old days when I did some good old C4 partisan work for some candidates that I really believed in. Shout out Progressive Mass. When you can endorse your candidates, go vote for them and go work hard for them, right? But what happens? As you heard Shanique say, we have this issue with the municipal census and then an active voters list. and put some things into perspective. September, the prelims this year alone, we heard from Lowell that there was 44% of their registered voters were placed on the inactive voter list. Let's say that again, 44%. We hear in this November, Brockton, November 2025, hold me down, because when I say it out loud, sometimes I got to double check my notes. 62% of voters placed on the active voter list. Friends, we have a problem. As a policy and organizing director for MassVOTE, I am here to say to, again, the community, kindred souls in this space, that we know that when we create policy, there's an intent. We intended on creating a policy that we at the time think is going to be better, right? As a CJ student, criminal justice background, laws are meant to be amended and changed and improved, right? So like policy is supposed to be a reflection of something that's going to make something better. Sometimes policies have unintended consequences. This particular thing is having egregious unintended, or in some cases, when you're telling them what the consequences are, we need a solution. And I don't know about y'all, but my energy this year is I'm not waiting for nobody. We don't need to wait for nobody. We have each other. We are brilliant. We are resourced, right? And we need to come together and continue to co-learn and advocate and push these things forward. We cannot wait. Things are being snatched from us, right? Things that have been fundamental to our democracy and to the fabric of our society are just being ripped, right? We have some fights before us. And so this is why this little 4'9" Puerto Rican lady is very much involved with election protections. Election protections, some of you might have been involved with EP work in the past. I don't think it's like tuned in exclusive to Massachusetts. It's part of a national big effort. So in November 2024, in partnership with Common Cause Lawyers for Civil Rights, MassVOTE partnered with the state, the National Coalition, to have an election protections program in Massachusetts. You heard Justin talking about that DOJ, worried about some interference. This year we're hearing about military. Thank you for naming those things, David and Justin, and those concerns that we were all like, is this real? Hold on a minute, right? And so what did we learn in November 2024? We deployed over 400 volunteers across the state of Massachusetts, specifically Massachusetts Election Protections Program. Trained over 400 volunteers to become versed in what is good and necessary poll monitoring under the Election Protection Program. What are the things that we should be engaging voters about? Being present if folks have questions, and keeping our eyes right and being present for our community. We understand that poll workers provide an incredible service. I have been a poll worker once in my life, and I am an organizer before I'm a poll worker. Bless our poll workers. 12 straight hours, no easy task. Thank you, right? But poll workers, clerks, wardens, we've all seen the different people that are in that space that are trying to make sure that everybody's on the same page, the information is flowing, that they're receiving the proper trainings. But even with all the best efforts, sometimes there's different interpretations or perceptions of what these things might mean. And so in November, I decided to test it out. As Shanique said, I went to one polling location in Chelsea. Then I went to another polling location in Chelsea and asked them the same question about, hey, if I'm on the inactive voter list, what are my options? And I got different responses from the same city to different clerks. Then went to the warden. Then I just said I was going to hop over to East Boston because I was onto something. You know, as organizers, we're always like trying to like gather data. And I was personally impacted, right? So I was like, I need to get to the bottom of this. Go to East Boston, shout out that East Boston High School warden. She had the right answer. But then I started to say, wait a minute. This is not just happening to me. How are voters being informed? How are they being told of what their options are? I had clerks, respectfully, I had clerks say to me, you're not on the active voter list. We're going to look for you in the inactive voter list. Your name is here. Do you have proof of identity? Oh, ma'am, I need to prove my identity. No, I do not. I might need to prove residency, not identity, right? We've become so accustomed, and you know, some of us, MassVOTE and for others that do voter education, thou does not need an ID to vote. Thou shall not be turned away from the polls, ever, right? You have the right to cast a ballot, okay? Don't ever leave. Now, all those different reasons, we all know them, right? We all know them. But the point is, we see that voters are showing up. There's so much confusion. They're like, am I an active voter? Am I an active voter? What do I need? Now we got folks thinking, well, shoot, can I go vote because I don't carry all my utility proof of address statements in my glove compartment and my passport or my ID. And there's just too much back to barriers. When I say barriers, I would say barriers. This is the kind of barriers we're talking about. You have 15 minutes to go vote in between a work schedule, pick up the kids, make sure your kids are eating, right? Or if you have to commute and you're not a driver, or if the polling location is actually in walking distance, or you have a family member that actually gave you a ride so you could go vote, right? Like there's a lot of like steps that people take to go vote. And so we joined this election protection program. I was placed in Suffolk County, and we're seeing like all those things in my mind. What's going to happen? But yes, Massachusetts does do a better job about having great elections, right? We didn't have like to compare to some states that have to contend with some things, fair to say. But that doesn't excuse us or dismiss us that we still have so much to improve, especially disability access, right? Naming some of those. So lo and behold, I'm in Boston in November. The phones start ringing, the lines start warming up. It's 12 o'clock. It's similar things, questions, all good. And all of a sudden, someone calls and goes, Marisol, there's a polling location that just ran out of ballots. And it's 4:30. 4:30 p.m., presidential day election in Boston. And it was in Hyde Park. Okay. And I said, okay, hold that thought. We immediately report it, right? Then I get another phone call, Rosendale, right on the same time. They're like, Marisol, somebody's saying here they've been in line for a while. And there's some rumors going around that they might be low on ballots. Low on ballots? 4:30 on a presidential? Huh. Report it. And then we get a call from National. Now I'm on the phone with some very amazing person who's like, here are all the things that we need you to do right now. I was like, I'm going out to that poll right now. I need to see this for myself. Luckily, election protection. No, I'm preaching to the choir. Lines of communication, right? A hotline that is staffed with election lawyers, nonpartisan, right? Election lawyers, good guys and good ladies and good people, okay? Communication, trained volunteers on the ground, making observations and reports, documentation. I'm a big fan of documenting y'all, right? Data is quantitative, qualitative, stories, impact, documentation, super important, especially for those who are litigators, right? We need some documentation. So I run out there, and sure enough, Hyde Park has run out of ballots at 5 o'clock. I start talking to people, been in line for well over an hour, 45 minutes. I heard some people left. My neighbor left. She was here for 2 hours. She didn't vote. No, she didn't vote. Uh-oh, we have a problem, right? Because technically, that type of on-the-ground operation allows us to see things in real time, get real conversations, and have, some real resources around us to make those higher level phone calls. Are we going to have to like extend and keep this poll open an extra few hours? Or are they coming tomorrow to come vote? Like, what's happening here? Because something's really off, right? So that was in place. And then Rosendale, they're like, no, they're running ballots over there. I don't know if some of y'all heard the stories, but then there was some immediate press that Boston's election department needs to be looked at, whether folks are like, they're going to be in receivership. No receivership, support. But elections in Boston is not under receivership because there's some nuance in that statement. They're doing okay. They did their investigation. They looked into things. Secretary of State had some conversations with Boston elections, and things were much different this year. But imagine having as a warden as well, having a polling location with a line around your polling location, and you're looking at your count, and it's 5 o'clock, and it's not even the height of peak time, and you ran out of ballots. So like election protection is not just for voters. It's not just about the importance of documenting so that we can make our policy efforts better, right? That we can also ask people to come and testify in these hearings, which, we got some of those ladies that were in that line to come and testify because that matters. Their voice matters. The impact matters. election protection is something that's gone on for a long time. But in this year, we were like, what does this really mean? Shout out Justin from the Brennan Center. We're like, what are they talking about, Department of Justice? Interference, what? We're like, not in Massachusetts, but just the thought of that. And we decided to prioritize, I think it's 6 cities and towns. Boston this year, this past November election, Boston, Worcester, Springfield, Brockton, Lawrence, and I think that's it. 5. Hopefully I'm not missing one. Yes, 5. Yeah. Boston, Worcester, Springfield, Lawrence, and Brockton. Now, we're seeing that people have been reporting that they still have some confusion and trouble within an active voter list issue. But we didn't have the scale program that we had in November 2024, without a doubt. But we also knew that from our previous year, we want to make sure that elections run smoothly, that communication between partners, and that's also the beauty of our organizing, right? Everyone in here, when you are on the ground, it's like, I know that person from that org or that org, right? And they're here for the same reasons. I want to emphasize the importance of what we say, right? Like what it means to be in partnership in this work, because no one person can do it all alone. We're going to need everybody, right? We all need each other. So being on the ground and making sure there's people that know that community. In Lawrence, we had ACLU Anchor, a program that was in partnership with some of our Democracy Hubs partners in Lawrence. We had, set up an operation in Boston with also some of our Boston Democracy Hub partners. So people that the community knows and trusts and has relationships with, all this is so, so critical to really changing an outcome, for people to really feel seen, to feel heard, and to know that there's actually power and change when we organize together, right? So election protection is about, of course, at the key components of what makes democracy great, about watching and keeping an eye, for any type of irregularities, to be able to, call the warden or call a lawyer and make sure they're getting a phone call if things are not adding up, or if somebody needs to be redirected gently, right? Maybe they have a mistake or they misconstrued something. We're here to just redirect you back, and make sure that all the issues, if there's an issue, that it's solved. I'm also a big fan, as someone who's managed candidate races. I always say, if we're seeing something once, I don't know if some of y'all remember, I think John that might say this too, if we see something once, and you see it twice, it's going to keep happening the whole day. If you see it once, say something, right? So that's just like really, really important as we start to think forward about what we're hearing from our communities. How are we taking those stories to our legislators? I will say that Senator John Keenan, chairman of the Joint Committee on Elections, Joint Committee on Election Laws, along with his co-chair, Dan Hunt, I will say we just found out this morning that same day has been reported favorably out of committee, which is great. And thank you, everyone. We still have a ways to go. Joint 10 rule day is approaching. Please keep talking to your legislators. I had to say that. But in relationship to election protection, because we know those policies could actually change what's happening with our voters down at the polls. We know that in our organizing going forward to the midterms, going forward to every single election that matters, we have to keep making sure that while we're protecting and resisting, I heard somebody named building resilience and resistance, but that we're also being proactive. We're being extremely proactive. And again, back to why democracy matters, and I end with the same thing. Like, this is why it matters. It matters for every fabric of what it is that those values that we embody, or those values that we want to leave in the fabric of our societies. And every little part is going to really make a difference. So continue to call your legislators about why decoupling municipal census is not necessary, why SDR is the greatest thing ever. And also increasing disability access, because we deserve nice things like better lighting and, accessible spaces for our communities. And I'm happy to talk about, if folks have any more questions about the operations of election protection. But I think most of you might know, if you haven't, forgive me, but why it's needed and why we will continue to do those programs. And if anybody ever wants to volunteer, I'd love to talk to you more about it as well.
Awesome. Marisol, thank you so much. And get a round of Zoom applause for Marisol. Awesome. And I know that all of our speakers said that they would be happy to take questions.